Hi guys. Um, yeah, this is better. My problem last time when I gave a talk was that I had 20 minutes, but I used 40. So this is the main, like, what I want to focus on is to finish in 20 minutes. Like, my time has already started, so let's talk about GraphQL. This will be like introductory talk, and the aim of this talk is to motivate you to actually try it in your current projects or a new project. And yeah, you can actually use it as a middleware on top of your existing REST API and actually introduce GraphQL gradually to your projects. And it will not break anything. So my name is Alex, and you can find me on internet as Alex Alexeev because my surname is Alexeev. And I work at Kyiv.com, as you know. And now we will start to talk about GraphQL, what it is. Basically, this query language plus runtime, which allows you to send queries and process them. GraphQL is used by many top-notch companies. Of course, it's Facebook. GitHub introduced their GraphQL API recently. It's Pinterest and some other companies, including Twitter and Yelp, for example. And why actually to use GraphQL? What are benefits? First one that I really like as mostly front-end oriented developer is that the body in the request that I sent looks exactly like JSON, but without values. For example, in this example, I send in the body of request this string, basically, and I receive this kind of response from the server, and I can use it. I can actually render it. The second one is there is only one request to the GraphQL server per page that you render. And you understand why it is good, right? Of course, if your GraphQL server works as a middleware and you put it on top of your REST server, you get your REST responses from through that GraphQL middleware, then anyway, you will send the same amount of requests to REST server as before. So GraphQL will not help with that, but at least the client will send only one request and receive the data in one response. This is good benefit for the client. So there is no overfetching or underfetching. And what it means that, for example, if you use REST API and you receive the response and there are some fields that you do not want to render, then it means that you overfetch your component, for example, in React. And underfetching means that if REST API endpoint does not provide the data you need, like in full amount, some fields are missing, then you need to ask backend guys, please add another endpoint with these fields. Everybody knows about it, right? So this is underfetching, basically. And in case of GraphQL, we do not have this problem. We get exactly the data we want to render, not more, not less. Also, when you write your GraphQL server or your GraphQL middleware, then you describe all the fields and you describe what type the field is. It's a string, integer, etc. And there's some music down. And from those types, the documentation for the server is generated automatically. And there is a nice tool that is called GraphQL. And it looks basically like this. This is the example of the GraphQL that runs on the GitHub GraphQL endpoint. And on this side, to the right, you can see that the documentation that was generated from the types that were put to for each field when the server was developed. And on the left, you see the body of the request that is sent, and in the middle, you see the response itself. Again, it looks the same as the request, but without values. And on the left, at the bottom, sorry, yeah, you see that you can put some variables, but I'll show you later how to use it. So there's no need for versioning your GraphQL server because, for example, if you write some REST API, then you, for better experience of all the users or all the clients that use the server, you need to put version numbers in endpoint URLs, like not to break anything. But in case of GraphQL, you can easily deprecate the fields. Just put the deprecation information in the field description, and user will see it. And for example, in that deprecation info, you can say use another field because this is deprecated. That's it. So there is no need for versioning your GraphQL API. Okay, a few words about syntax now. As I already showed you, it looks like this, like JSON without values. And in this case, for example, I decided to add information about salary. And then I decided, for example, to add information about my body parameters, like height and weight, right? And this request can grow in size. And I do not like it. I want, for example, to divide this query, it's basically GraphQL query, into pieces. And I can do it by introducing fragments. So basically, I introduce fragment for body type. It includes height and weight. And I call it body F, like body fragment. And this way, I can change those internals to that fragment. I just reference it. And I continue to do the same with the salary. I introduce the fragment for salary. And why this written on body or on salary? This is because the body field and the salary field has their types and they're named like this. So we work with, and we can continue to use fragments even further. So why do we need it? It's just not just for the sake of dividing the query into pieces. It is also that we can put those fragments inside children components. And this way we collocate the data requirements with the React components code itself. So we just divide the query the same way as we divide our application into components. And then from those components, those requirements go up to the top, up to the main parent. And that parent is responsible for sending the GraphQL query to the server. That's it. This is an example of the same example as I showed for GitHub. And this is how the fragments can be used in case of that API. So I just put the bio, created that in the location in the separate fragment, and referenced it in the main query, in the root. How we can also use the parameters. For example, GitHub provides this query user, and you just give it a username. That's it, it works. And you can also use variables inside your queries. In this case, I created the username variable, and you see that at the bottom in that box, I indicated the value for that variable, and it works the same way. So more in syntax you can read on GraphQL.org. This is the main website that contains all full specification for GraphQL. And now I'll tell you a few words about libraries that you can use. So for clients, I mean, how you actually send the request from your front end. Okay, like you can use normally fetch as you probably used before. You can use Axios and your library. And it is quite easy. You just have the GraphQL endpoint, and you have the query and you give it as a parameter to when you call the when you run the URL, and you normally get the response, put it in JSON, and use it later. But there are really great libraries here on the market, and the main ones that at the same time they're competitors, but they are working together. I mean, those developers, they all the time communicate and they share their opinions, so they do not really fight against each other. They go along, and some of Apollo, for example, is really easy to learn, but really modern, has some advantages like static queries, but it's more advanced topic. I will not take it here, talk about it here. And this is an example about how data using these libraries can be collocated in the components. Here you see that that main parent is called query render. It is responsible for sending the query to the GraphQL server. And those children, they have some requirements, and they're indicated by those colorful circles. And children just give the information one by one to the main parent, and that parent sends the query to GraphQL server. And in its turn, GraphQL server returns the JSON in the format that's in the same format that you required. And then normally through props, you can give it from the parents to the children. That's easy. Now the server, the official reference implementation is GraphQL.js. If you go there, Google it, you then install that GraphQL package. And this is the one example. It's not an example, but I just want to show you how easy it is to create a server. Just write this amount of code, and you already have working server that you can access by, in this case, on localhost 4000. And graphical, that IDE that we saw for GitHub, it is already also included here for free. And now you also can use Apollo server. It is similar to that previous example, GraphQL.js that I showed, but it has more usable API, I would say, and some additional features. And the new one that I really like is Prisma. If you Google Prisma GraphQL. And the thing is that it provides you already with database. It is PostgreSQL, and there is an API how to actually easily connect the resolvers of GraphQL to your database. And it's very, very powerful and generates for you a lot of possible queries like mutations, etc. And if you want to go really, really fast, then try GraphQL. You will get the GraphQL endpoint right away, and you will just need to change schema a bit, and that's it. And if you want to track the activities on your queries and check some performance information and do some additional caching, then try Apollo Engine. That's it. Questions? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I can return back.
Some children can have some restrictions, for example, else, and it can provide.
What restrictions?
Restrictions, for example, else authorization.
Okay.
For example, one of the children requires authorization for return data.
Okay.
What GraphQL, how GraphQL resolves this?
In case children doesn't have access, right? You have some conditions inside your component, right? And in this case, you can send another query that is guest only, for example. From that children, you can give only the requirements that are available for everybody.
So in response, you will get another data than your request. So if you request some structure,
the thing is that, for example, in that children, you have first thing that you can do is you can render different children depending on your role, right? So, and for example, this one, imagine that it is a wrapper around 3 other children for each role, for example. And if you have some role, then only those requirements will go up. Requirements that are like available for that role. Did I answer? So it's like it will send requirements, send the query conditionally on the role you have. If you want, we can talk later about it. Okay?
You mentioned that you have some kind of a proxy that accepts GraphQL request and then fetch the data from APIs.
Okay.
How does it work in your environment? I mean, how does this GraphQL query translates to the requests to REST APIs? Is it custom server or is it some?
Basically, in case if your GraphQL is like works as a middleware, right? As I understand. From the front end, you will send the query to one endpoint, so GraphQL endpoint, with the body. And then in that middleware, for each field that you require from GraphQL, there are functions that are called resolvers. And in each yeah. And in those resolvers, you actually describe where you want to get data from.
Another question?
React is about one-way data flow. How is it possible that fragments go upstream to the parent?
This is not about data going, right? This is about requirements going. The thing is that, as I showed you in example of in syntax example for fragments, we reference fragments in the main query, right? By those 3 dots, if you remember.
Yeah.
And for example, in Relay Modern, this is the library for front end. It understands how to construct this tree. It is not about React. It is about Relay that handles those references.
Understood.
And the same I think works for Apollo, but I'm not sure.
Next question.
Thanks a lot. I have a question about if we imagine we will have telephony, we're using WebSockets and we're using server-side events. Will GraphQL work correctly, or we must use another middleware to do?
Like if your WebSockets are constructed properly, in GraphQL there are so-called subscriptions. In GraphQL there are 3 types of query, like normal one for data, mutation query, and also subscriptions query. And that subscription query, you on the GraphQL side, you need to connect that WebSocket to that subscription query, and this way from the front end you can subscribe to those events and actually update the front end automatically when events from WebSocket comes.
So we'll not use some data and we'll not will conflicts with GraphQL server, yes?
Once again, sorry?
We will not will have a conflicts with the GraphQL server and will not lose some data.
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. I think Michal can answer more properly to this case because he worked closer to that.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
So next question.
Hi, I was wondering, are you using React Apollo?
Yeah, okay.
And if so, are you managing state with Apollo Link State or using any other state management?
Currently in our projects, including that Balkan project, mostly we use Relay Modern. So, I know that Apollo Link can be used even separately, like even with Relay, but we didn't try to manage the local state with Apollo Link yet, but we used that for caching in some cases.
More questions?
I think
Many-
this guy.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. The question is there some way to use GraphQL instead of Redux or Flux? And should we store the data in parent components and then just pass it to different child? Or is there some more concise way to do
Yeah,
that?
I would say that in our project that is quite big, what we realized that when we started to use Relay Modern, for example, and it's I think the same case with Apollo, and we started to use GraphQL, it really removed a lot of cases when we would use Redux. Like, we do not need Redux in most of cases anymore. Like, it is very rare cases when we need to give data from one state of one component that is really far away from another one. But I don't know why really. But Relay Modern helps to get rid of those cases. And now even you can use the context in your React instead of Redux, right? Yeah.
More questions here.
Sorry that there is. We'll return here.
In terms of the React components, what's the correct lifecycle method you're meant to be using to pass the fragments up to the parent? Like, when does that happen?
In a Relay Modern, you have special higher order component that is called create fragment, and you just wrap your normal component, and that higher order component you indicate the fragment information, fragment requirement, and also Relay has a compiler that goes through all the fragments, all the React files, and looks for fragments. And basically, it looks at the references in those fragments, and it builds the tree. So it gets the fragment, put it instead of a reference of a parent fragment, and this way it goes up until the parent, the main parent. Yeah.
Hi.
Yes.
You mentioned GraphQL subscriptions. I wanted to ask if you are using them actually, and what's your experience? Is it good or what?
Until now, we used those ones in a few cases. Again, Michal can tell you more, but an example is that, for example, we have comments in our application, and we always listen to new comments to come, and we fetch it like this. Currently, we use it separately from our main GraphQL server because of, I think Michal will explain it. Yeah, and can you explain it right now? Nice.
So how we are, is it working? Yeah. So we are using subscriptions due to another service on AWS, which is called AppSync, which was introduced on December. The reason is we were always afraid of manually handling all those WebSocket connections in the with big traffic that can happen. So AWS provide AppSync, which is like GraphQL backend as a service with subscription support. And because of this feature, we are happy to use it. We don't need to be afraid of managing servers, handling all WebSocket connections. And the benefit, of course, is the same with fetching data as for standard queries. You just ask for events that you are interested, for example, new comments created, and then you specify what data you are willing to receive, because some component needs to render it. Nothing, no overfetching again, and no manual handling of those connections. So experience is like in the beginning, because the AppSync is pretty fresh product of AWS, but so far so good. It really works well.
We have time for one more question. Please raise
This
your
guy,
hand was
This
first.
was for a long time.
Thanks. What about pushing data to GraphQL? I mean, GraphQL server to nodes, to each node. I know that we easily can read data, but what about write data through
You
GraphQL.
mean send the queries to change the information database, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, there are special type of query. It's called mutation. You just describe the input that the mutation needs to receive, and you just this is basically like variables. You give that information about what to change in that mutation. And then on GraphQL server, in the mutation GraphQL server, there is info of how to handle it. If you want to, for example, do change on in database, you give it a query and something.
What about if you take data from different APIs and want to like transaction to push data to those APIs?
You just yes, sorry. You just describe what APIs you want to trigger in your mutation on GraphQL server. That's it, and what information to send to them.
Do we have some problems or edge cases?
Not really. For now, we do not have like a lot of cases that we would use different sources for one GraphQL middleware, but I think we use like 3 sources mostly, and most of the time there was no problem. We just trigger the endpoints. That's it. Okay.
If you have a use case where it's sensitive to handle the transactions and it's distributed on more services, then I think it's a red flag, and you should refactor a backend and put it in one transaction-safe backend service.
That's it for questions. Thank you, Alex, for the talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to go to that slide really quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.